Hey everyone, and welcome to the 4th episode in my 2-player tank game tutorial series. Today is going to be a big episode. We are going to be adding in the bullet shooting, and we'll be adding the UI down here to display the power of your bullet. So it's going to be a pretty big episode, so grab some popcorn and remember to hit that like button and consider subscribing and leave a comment down below. But anyway, let's get into this tutorial. Alrighty, so I have 3 new sprites. I have one called Bullet, Power, and UI. In Bullet, I have a costume called Zoom, and it's the same costume that's in Player 1 and Player 2. Then I have the actual costume Bullet, which is centered on the tip of the bullet. Last but not least, I have Impact, which is just a big circle. The power is the power of the bullet, and it is just a text. So I have red text 1 through 9 and then 0 on the end. And just for reference, this is how big the text is. The reason it's red is so that way I can use the color effect and all that stuff to change it to any color I'd like. And the outline on this is 2. And whatever the costume is, the costume name is named the same, if that makes sense. So this is number 4 and the costume name is 4. Last but not least, I have UI, which I have arrow in it, which you'll be able to click to increase your power. Lines, which are really hard to see. Let me make a background. So as you can see, they're just kind of these lines. And then I have lines 2, 3, 4, and 5. And the different ones are just an animation for when you change the power. Kind of hard to see here, but you'll see it once it's done. Last but not least, I have shadow, which will be at the bottom of the screen to kind of be behind all this UI stuff. As always, if you want to use my exact sprites and costumes, you can check out the link in the description, and I have a project shared with all of my art in it. Okay, let's start by programming the bullet. So in the bullet, go ahead and add a when I receive reset hide, so it hides the initial sprite. And now when I start as a clone, we want to switch the costume to the bullet, go to front layer, then we want to go backwards 4 layers. We want to clear the graphic effects, set the size to 100%, and now point in direction 90. Okay, and we don't actually want it to point in direction 90. We want it to point in direction whatever the direction our barrel is shooting. So let's go ahead and make a variable called shoot direction for all sprites, and now point in direction, shoot direction. In player 1, let's go ahead and at the very bottom of the turn right, set the shoot direction to current direction. Now pull that into player 2 and set it down there. Now you may be wondering why we're using the same variable. That's because we already have this checking to make sure it's the correct turn before we run this custom block. So if we show the shoot direction, you can see that right now it's 0, now it's 90 because it's matching the direction of the player 1. But if I press space, it'll change to -90 because that's the direction of player 2. So there we go, that's working properly. So now let's position the bullet. Now to do that, we need to know the turn. So add an if else, checking if the turn is equal to player 1. So if the turn's player 1, then we need to make a kind of go-to variable. Now we don't actually have that yet. So let's add a when I receive, now tick, space, dash, and then bullets. So this is a new tick. Then we want to go ahead and go into ground, say, duplicate this part, and then delete the bottom. Now pull in this go-to section into the bullet. Now in the bullet, we can put that in the tick section right there. So now it's basically made new variables for us. So let's rename the ground X and Y to the correct bullet. So name this one bullet X and then ground Y to bullet Y. Now this looks nice and tidy. Next, we want to just switch costume to zoom, set the size to the camera zoom, and then switch costume back to the bullet. Now that we have that, we don't need the set size to right here. Okay, so now that we have all that, we can go ahead and set the bullet X to the correct thing in the beginning. So if the turn is player 1, we want to go ahead and set the bullet X to tank X of player 1. Duplicate that and now set the bullet Y to the tank Y of player 1. Now, if it's not player 1, it's player 2. We want to change these two to player 2s and then do tank X here and then tank Y here. Now we need to know the speed of the bullet. So to do that, let's make a for the sprite only variable called bullet speed, like so. Not with a slash. We're not doing Minecraft commands. And then if it's player 1, we want to set the bullet speed to, let's just set it to 5 for now, and then 5 here. Now eventually this will actually be player 1 power and then the player 2 power here. Now let's make a custom block called move, then an input steps, then a label steps. Now the reason we're making our own custom block here is because we can't use this move 10 steps that's built in because we are using the bullet X and bullet Y to make it scrolling. So we need to make our own little thing. So this is just some simple cosine and sine math. So we want to go ahead and change the bullet X by the the abs of and change this to cosine. Now we want to go ahead and take the cosine times the steps and put that in there like so. Now we want to do cosine of minus and put 90 here, then subtract the shoot direction, which is the direction we want to move in. We want to do cosine of 90 minus shoot direction times steps. Now we want to go ahead and duplicate that and do bullet Y here, and then change the cosine to sine. So now we can go ahead and use that block right here. Let's just make it move 25 steps so it'll move forward a bit. And then last but not least, after we set it up, show. Now let's go ahead and make sure we broadcast this tick bullets, that way it forever does that. So inside of the backdrops here, add another tick underneath here and do tick bullets. So now let's go ahead and start the game, wait for the intro to finish, go into bullet and click create clone of myself. As you can see here, it goes perfectly at the barrel. Let's go ahead and make another one, and as you can see, there it is. Now just for testing, let's go ahead and add a forever loop and move 1 steps here. Move the barrel and then create a clone of myself. You can see that the bullet is going straight out of the barrel. So we want to go ahead and do move bullet speed steps, and now we need a gravity variable. We'll make a new variable called bullet YV and go ahead and change the bullet YV right here by negative 0.5 so it goes down. And also now we can change the bullet Y itself by that bullet YV right above. If we go ahead and move the barrel and then click create clone of myself, you can see that it will kind of fly out and then just go down like that. Now let's make it turn in the speed it's going, because right now it just stays in one direction. So to fix this, go ahead and pull this out like so and add an if else in there like so. And now you can snap that back on there. Now we want to go ahead and check if the shoot direction is greater than 0. Then we want to go ahead and turn 15 degrees. Duplicate this cosine, 90 minus all that stuff, and then add the sine and all of that stuff. So the cosine of 90 minus shoot direction plus the sine of 90 minus shoot direction like that. And then if we're going left, we want to subtract those two. You can now see that if we go ahead and test this out, the bullet will start to turn down, as you can see. Now there is one thing that I don't like. As you can see, if we create a clone of the bullet, it kind of flashes right behind it for a second. To fix this, go ahead and add a hide up here, and then above this show, put a wait 0 seconds. You can now see that if we try this, it should not do the flash anymore. If we go ahead and switch the turns, you can see that now it will shoot out of the player 2. Now let's destroy the bullet once it hits the ground. So above here, add an if statement checking if we are touching the ground. Then we want to make sure we're going down. So and the bullet velocity is less than -5. Now add an or underneath all of this like so. Now another or in here and check if bullet X is less than -200, so we're off the side of the left of the map, or bullet X is greater than the world width times 480, so this is the whole entire width of the world. Now subtract half of the screen, which is 240. That will make sure that a bullet never goes out of bounds. Then we need a new variable called costume, and then in the tick loop, we want to switch costume to the costume. Now, in the very beginning, let's set that costume to bullet, and then you can remove the switch costume to now. Now in here, let's set that costume to the impact. Make sure you set it to whatever your costume is named. As you can see, mine is named impact, so I'm setting it to impact. Then let's repeat 10 times. We are going to change the ghost effect by 10 and then the size by 4 so it kind of fades out. Then hide. Then wait 1 second. Broadcast the next turn and then delete this clone so that way it gets rid of it. So you can now see that this is not working anymore for some odd reason, and I'm not sure why. The reason this isn't working is because I didn't actually put the right parameter in. We don't want to check if the bullet X is less than 200. We want to check if the bullet Y is less than 200. And now we want to go ahead and put an OR in here and now put it in the right side. Now check if the bullet X is less than -220, so it's kind of off the edge of the screen, or the bullet Y is greater than all of that stuff. So let's test out some stuff here. Let's set the bullet Y velocity to 0 in the very beginning, and that seemed to have fixed it. You can now see what will happen is it'll shoot out of the barrel, hit the ground, do the effect, then it'll switch the turn to the player 2. Okay, so now in the player 1, instead of broadcasting next turn here, let's create a clone of the bullet, and make sure you go ahead and do the same exact thing in the player 2. Okay, so if we go ahead and try this, so here, alrighty, now press space, it will shoot the bullet, and then it'll switch to player 2, we can shoot the bullet, and then so on and so forth. 4th. Now let's get the power working. So in player 1, make a for all sprite variable called player 1 power. Go ahead and make another for all sprite variable called player 2 power. Now in the backdrops, go ahead and set the player 1 power to 50 in the reset and set the player 2 power to 50 as well. Now in the bullet, instead of setting the bullet speed to 5 in the player 1, set it to player 1 power. Then in the else, we can set it to player 2 power. So now you can see that once we try this out, the bullet should go far now. That's a little bit too powerful, so let's go ahead and tone that down a little. So to do that, take the player 1 power divided by 2.2 and then do the same thing for the player 2. So we're just basically cutting the power in half. Make a for all sprite variable called follow bullet. In the player 1, set the follow bullet to true right after we create the clone, and also do that in the player 2. So right here, set the follow bullet to true like so. Now in the backdrops in the reset, set the follow bullet to false. When I receive next turn, go ahead and set the follow bullet to false. Now we need to go ahead and store the position of the very first bullet that we shot. So make a list for all sprite variable called bullet X, and then another for all sprite list called bullet Y. In the bullet, to make a ID variable so we know which bullet is the very first bullet. So we want to make a variable called ID, and then in the very beginning here, set that ID to make another variable for all sprites called bullet number, and now we can set the bullet ID to the bullet hashtag. Now in the very bottom here, check if ID is equal to 0. So if it's the very first bullet, then we're going to insert the bullet X at 1 of bullet X, and then insert bullet Y at 1 of bullet Y. And now if we go ahead and test this out, once we click the shoot, it'll add a bunch of positions to bullets X. Now in the backdrops, in the next turn, you can delete all of bullet X and then delete all of bullets Y, so it clears it out once the turn is over. Now in the camera, in this else here, add an if else, check if the follow bullet is equal to true. And if it is, then we want to duplicate this part and take out the tank X and tank Y. Now all you want to do is put item 1 of bullet X for the X and item 1 of bullet Y for the Y part, and take that divided by 1. You should be able to see now that if we go ahead and shoot the bullets, here we go, look at that, the camera follows the bullet, and then once it's over, it will go to the whatever player it should go to. Now we can actually combine these lists. So to do that, we can delete bullet Y and then rename bullet X to bullet position. And now instead of Y, we can just do item 2 of bullet position. In the actual bullets, we can insert bullet Y at 2 of bullet position. Then in the backdrops, we can go ahead and remove this, delete all of bullet Y here, and then delete the bullet Y list. So you can now see it will work exactly the same, but we just use one list. So basically what that did is the very first item will be the X, and then the second will be the Y. Okay, now in the camera, let's go ahead and duplicate this change camera zoom, put that right on top, and set the camera zoom to, let's do 35. So that way it zooms out once we shoot. Boom, it zooms out, hits the ground, and then zooms in to player 2, and then we can keep on going. The reason we went through all the hassle of doing the lists and stuff is that way the camera will only follow the very first bullet that we made. So what that means is we can actually, in player 1, repeat 10 times, create a bullet, and as you can see here, it'll create 10 bullets, but it won't break because the system knows to just follow the very first one. So you can remove that repeat 10 times. And because we've set everything up correctly, if we go ahead and set the player 2 power, say, to 1, and now we shoot, you can see that the bullet just kind of comes out like a little puny thing. Now let's make a number counter that will display the power of our bullet so we can actually visually see it. So in the power, add a when green flag clicked forever hide. And now we're going to go ahead and make the number counter from my number counter 2.0 tutorial video. So when I receive begin round, we want to go ahead and make a variable called update counter. This is going to be for the sprite only. Make another variable for a sprite called display power. So this is going to be whatever the numbers are displaying. We're going to set the update counter to display power plus 1, so that way it's different, so it'll force the system to update. Now we want to forever check if not equals the display power does not equal the update counter. Then we want to broadcast a new message called delete numbers, and then we want to make a block that will display the text. It'll be called text, then an input called text, then a label called size, with a colon, and then an input called size, a label called X, and an input called X, a label called Y, then an input called Y, a label called spacing with a colon, then an actual input called spacing, a label centered, input called centered, and then click run screen without refresh and click OK. Now all you need to do is run that right here. So you should see that they're all labeled nicely. It says text, size, X, Y, spacing, and then centered. We want to set the text to the display power, the size to 25, the X to 0, the Y to -150, so it's at the bottom, the spacing to 1, and the centered to true, so that way it's nice and centered. Now we want to check if the centered is true. Then we want to go ahead and go to, this is quite long, so make sure you copy this, the length of text, take that times, then another times, and do spacing times the text size. Then we want to take all of that times -0.5, then we want to add divided by, and then a times in the left side, and do spacing times size once again, then divide that by 2. Then we want to add all that with the X, so it'll go to our position we want like so. So make sure yours looks exactly like mine, otherwise this won't work. Then for the Y, just do Y. Now in the else, just simply go to X and Y if we aren't centered. Now we want to set the size to the size, and now we need a for the sprite only variable called I for the index of the letter. So set that I to 0, then repeat length of text, so it loops through all of them. Switch costume to, now we want to do the letter 1 of Apple and change this to the letter I of text. Then we want to create a clone of myself, so it prints it out, then change the X by the spacing time the size, so that way it will move correctly. Then last but not least, we can change the I by 1 to make it go to the next digit. Now when I start as a clone, we can go ahead and check if else and do if the turn is equal to null, which is in the very beginning, then we can just go ahead and hide, otherwise show. Now clear the graphic effects and then set the brightness effect to 100 so it's white, then forever we want to go to front. Okay, now let's go ahead and see if this is working. Once we start, there we go, look at that, we have a little text thingy. Okay, I forgot to actually do this broadcast delete numbers, so make sure you add a when I receive delete numbers, delete this clone. And now you can see that that no longer happened. I forgot another piece. Right after we do that, we want to set the update counter to the display power. Now you can see that that doesn't work anymore. Why doesn't that work? Okay, one thing we can try is just swapping these two like so. Oh, I know what we do. We need to make sure we show it once the round starts. So when I receive next turn, show. So now you can see hopefully that once it switches the turn, here we go, look at that, we have the power variable being shown down at the bottom, and that will display the power. Well, actually it won't yet because we forgot to do something. So inside of the UI, let's go ahead and do a when green flag click, hide this in a forever, and check if else. Now we can check if the turn is equal to the player 1. Then we want to go ahead and set the display power to the player 1 power. Otherwise, set the display power to the player 2 power. So you can now see that once we start this, it should set it to 50, but it set it to 12. I'm not smart. I did switch costume to letter I of size. We actually want to do switch costume to letter I text. We want to set the I to 1 in the very beginning. Now you can see that here we go, it's 50 finally. And as you can see here, if we go ahead and set the player 1 power to 255, it sets it to 255. We can shoot and then it'll be really far, then it will switch back to 50 because the player 2 power is 50. Now the size doesn't seem like it's actually working. Let me figure out why, and that's because I forgot something else. In the when I start as a clone forever here, we want to change the size by 100 minus its current size, then divide all of that by 2. So now you can see that if we start this game, here we go, this is finally a normal size, the spacing is all correct, and everything looks good and is displaying the correct text. Wow, that took a bit to get there. In the bullets here, we want to change the bullet number by 1 in the very beginning. Then in the backdrops, on the when I receive next turn, set that to 0. And we actually want to set the ID to the bullet number before we change it by 1. Sadly, I'm not going to have time this episode to finish up the UI because I've been recording for almost an hour. So thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, make sure to hit that like button and consider subscribing. But anyway, this has been Owen, and I am out.